You cannot make this stuff up. In the same week that the Pentagon announced they're integrating Grok into US military networks, regulators in the UK and EU are threatening to ban it for generating child exploitation material. I want that to sink in for a minute. This is the waters we're swimming in right now. And so this week, I want to focus on this, not just purely from a tech standpoint, not to just comment on what's going on with it, but to talk about the story about how we got here and how never to monetize a moral crisis to hopefully prevent you from ever finding yourself in, hopefully never this situation specifically, but even in anything remotely like it. I'm Christopher Lind, and this is Future Focus. And my commitment to you this week is not to do a hot take on the Grok situation. I want to do a strategic leadership autopsy on this and look at the decision-making chain that led to this mess and some of the decisions that were made so you don't make the same mistakes. So if you find my content helpful, if you enjoy the perspective that I bring to these kind of difficult topics, it would mean the world to me if you would like this, if you would share it with somebody who else might benefit from it, and if you would subscribe. I know a lot of you are not subscribed. And if you feel so inclined to formally say, thank you, Christopher, for this episode, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Christopher Lind and say thanks. All right, so let me set some context for those of you, I'll be brief on this, who may not be as familiar with the situation right now. So first, there's the whole, in late December, Grok released the latest version of its image generation capability, and it's called Flux. So similar to how Google has nano bananas for its image generation, Grok launched its Flux capability. And they did so very, boldly with the marketing that there were zero guardrails on it, okay? That you were going to be able to do with it whatever you wanted. And the result went bad really quick, as it probably didn't take many of you very long to figure that out. But tragically, and this is not even a laughing matter, immediately the Nudify trend went absolutely viral. And when I say the Nudify trend, what I mean is users took non-consensual, not that I even know that there's any consensual justification for this, but they took non-consensual images of real women and public figures and children even, put it in the AI model and asked it to undress them. Okay. So yeah, first of all, one, if you don't see an issue with that, you're probably going to want to unsubscribe and not follow me, not because I'm going to sit and talk about that at length, but just you're not going to like the point of view that I tend to come at things from. But anyway, the heat this has created massive backlash. So on a formal standpoint, you've got, the UK and EU are launching an investigation into it. Indonesia, Malaysia, they're looking at it almost on the verge of straight up banning it. And the public outcry has been absolutely enormous. As a dad to 8 kids, 3 young daughters, I had my own reaction to this. So you've got that situation going on, but then almost in this kind of strange dystopian world, in the same breath, Pete Hegseth announced, our defense secretary announced, that Grok would be integrated into the Pentagon's networks to unleash experimentation. So to kind of like let it run wild. And so you have this vendor creating this brand toxic liability that's also being handed the keys to national security information. So it's a very strange thing. But what's even more strange about it, and this goes back to something that I brought up in the introduction that I really want to hit on, was I think what I'm seeing people are legitimately outraged at some of just those decisions that I laid out. But specifically to the Nudify issue, one of the things that's really caused even more uproar was Grok's response, the team's response to it. And it wasn't to say, we are going to shut down Flux immediately. We are going to, we're going to fix it. We're going to pull it offline. It wasn't to disable the feature at all. Instead, they said what we're going to do in response is make it available only to paid users, which, going to my earlier point, like, don't to try and put out a moral fire by trying to make money off of it. So that's where we're at right now. And like I said, my goal is not to spend a lot of time giving my perspective or opinions on the two situations here, but to say, this is where we are. Okay, this is where we are right now. You can like it, you can hate it, you can be angry, you can be sad. It's the moment we're in, and it's the moment in the work that I do, not to this degree, but many organizations are finding themselves in 2026 is they're running into some of these things, and some might not be there yet. But my goal with this is to focus on 4 key points in the chain where this breakdown likely occurred and some key things that happened to hopefully help you not do this same thing. So the first one I want to talk about is this. Even before you get to this point, the idea that this was not an accident, okay? This was by design. Grok did not accidentally ignore safeguards, okay? It's not like they launched Flux and were like, we told it not to do that, and then it did it. Their entire brand promise on this capability and Grok in general has been launched as, it's unleashed, it's anti-woke. There are no guardrails. That is a specific and intentional choice that the organization made. And if you're not careful, the brand promise you make will eventually become your liability. So if you sell to people speed and a lack of rules, it's a bit foolish to be surprised when your product ends up breaking the law and you find yourself in front of regulators, in front of public outcry, all of these things. And so, but this is not, I don't run into very many organizations that are quite this extreme in terms of their brand. But what I do run into is people who are either don't have clear, like, here's what our brand promise is. Here is what our company stands for. Or if they do, it's very vague, or the accountability structures aren't really in place to hold people to it. And so I bring this up to, first of all, say this kind of thing doesn't happen by accident. And the same thing is true with situations in your organization or in your own personal life. Like, you don't get here, you don't wake up one day and, whoa, we have a Flux image generation capability that is undressing children. That doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen in your world. And so right now is the perfect time to do an audit of your brand DNA. Like, do an actual audit of, what does our company, or what do I as an individual stand for? What are the core differentiators or your value proposition, the things that you are built on? What is that foundation? Because you can't say you're a disruptor without being destructive. And if you don't have guardrails around, well, what do we mean and how do we govern disruptive? There's a huge difference between challenging paradigms and actually breaking the law. And this is the time for every organization to say, let's slow down, let's pause, let's take a look here and see, what do we stand for? What are the things that we're built on? And not only, do we have our key pillars of whatever sitting on a PowerPoint presentation in place. Now's the time to look and say, right, but do our goals, do our accountability structures that we have in place, do they drive towards that? Or do they actually encourage the opposite kind of behavior? If you've got, again, if you're one of your value props is we're a disruptor, are you actually encouraging people to be disruptive in productive ways, or are you actually encourage them not to take risks? Because I see that happen all the time in organizations. We want people to not do the status quo, and yet the people who don't do the status quo end up on a PIP because they're not, adhering to the status quo type of a thing. And this is a perfect time for every organization to do this, so that as you move into 2026 and beyond, in an AI world where AI is only amplifying the things that you're doing, if you have vulnerabilities in what that foundation is, AI is just going to split the foundation into multiple pieces. Now's the time to seal up the cracks, make sure there's a foundation in the first place, and make sure that foundation is being rightfully incentivized and that you have clear guidelines for people as they move forward. And so that as you bring AI in, I was on a panel, an advisory call this week already, where we were talking about the fact that, as companies are building agents to do some of this work and take care of some of these tasks, one of the things that helps AI be better at representing your brand voice is having clear, well-defined, principles, so that AI at least knows, okay, well, if you say you're this and this is what that scale looks like when I'm faced with this decision, I'm at least doing my best to adhere to that. And so, if you don't have that, it's one, going to be really hard to get AI to do anything related to it. But two, your people aren't going to be any better at it. Just because you said, well, don't you, sign off on our company's core values? Well, yeah, but that was the only time I ever saw them. And the way my bonus structure is set up, I actually won't make a bonus if I actually stuck to those values and those principles. So needless to say, there's a chance to get in front of it before it actually blows up, before you find yourself in a Grok flux situation like Grok is in 2026. The second point that I would bring up, though, is the risk of the silent voice, the dissenter, that often gets shut down. Because I don't work at XAI, I don't have any involvement with Grok, but I've been around the block long enough to know that it is pretty much statistically impossible that not a single person saw this risk coming, that it never occurred to anyone that someone might do this, especially given some of the stuff that XAI has gotten in trouble for in the past already. Now, whether or not anybody formally said anything is another situation, depending on what the culture and the overall attitude is over there. But it is statistically impossible that truly people are sitting there going, it never even occurred to us that this could possibly happen. Engineers knew what the flux did. They knew what it was capable of. And someone somewhere knew and probably raised their hand and said, are we at all concerned that something like this might happen, that people may use this? And we all know and have all been in meetings where that happens, where somebody does it. And, sometimes the person has a reputation of being that dissenter. Everybody's got this great idea. Everybody gives it the thumbs up. And then somebody goes, but did we consider this? And there's almost a collective sigh of like, that can happen in a room, which quietly communicates to everybody, don't raise your hand, don't raise concerns. And so it's that one person, sometimes it's like your final insurance policy. And in this case, it got, either it had just happened so many times that even the person who normally is that person finally went, well, they got fired, or just went, I'm not even going to bother bringing it up anymore because I already know what's going to happen to this. Instead of being seen as the insurance policy, as the person that goes, that's a fair point. Did we consider this? Have we evaluated the risks associated with this? Because before Flux went out, there should have been, and likely was, a series of meetings deciding about what are we actually going to do with this? And the most dangerous room in business, while it may not seem this way, it may not seem the most convenient, but the most dangerous room in business is the one where everybody nods in agreement with zero questions, concerns, anything. Because when that happens, you've lost your collective insurance policy when literally everybody in the room says, yep, 100% agree, no concerns whatsoever. There isn't a single decision I've ever encountered in my life where someone somewhere shouldn't at least go, I'm a little concerned about this. Maybe the concern isn't worth actually taking action on. And I think that's one of the things that there's opportunity. And what I'm saying here isn't you need to action against every dissenting opinion that pops up, but you need to at least have considered it and said, have we thought about that? Have we mitigated that risk? Is that something that we built into our plan? You know, when someone somewhere said, hey, what if people use Flux to, without people's consent, undress images of them, someone somewhere needed to have accounted for that. And if the action they took was their plan, well, I don't know what to say about that. But you need to actually validate the dissent. And I think that's an important thing that gets missed. And I think threading this needle importantly is really, really clear, because where people get hesitant and where I consistently see people overwhelmed with this is they feel like they have to obey the risk officer. You know, just because someone says they have a concern, you have to take action on it. You have to do something with it. No, that is not what I'm saying. You know, I'm not saying that, but you do need to do more than just go noted and then move on. You do need to actually record it, make sure you've understood it clearly. And if you make the choice to override that, you need to be willing to take on the risk associated with overriding that. You can't sign off your name and say, we heard that, but you know, we didn't do it. But it's not my fault. Like, no, you're making a conscious decision to say, said person raised this risk and I hear it. I've considered it and we're moving forward. And maybe that is what happened. I'm not internal to the XAI team. I don't know if, you know, safety person or compliance person did say, hey, I have a concern about this. And somebody went, who cares? If that happens, we'll just monetize it. But you have to do more than just roll your eyes and say, whatever, you know, this is too expensive, or we'll deal with that later. And unfortunately, I think that's kind of the narrative of the day is, well, we'll just do it and ask for forgiveness later. And there are certain times where that may be the appropriate step to take if you've adequately assessed the risk and considered, you know, the viability or the liability behind it, and the probability of it happening. And you've done a thorough analysis of this. You may say, we really don't think that's going to happen. But if it does, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And we're fully prepared to stand behind the fact we consciously made that decision. You know, if you're going to try and hide the fact that's what you did, we did know about it, we just didn't do anything. Well, then that's not okay. You have to be willing to say, we did, that was a concern of ours. It was raised. We did an analysis on it. We really never expected this was going to happen. And we figured if it did, it was going to be a low enough risk, we would cross that bridge at this point. Clearly, we were wrong, and being willing to admit that you're wrong. If you're going to, you know, move forward and not act on what the dissenting voice says. Now, that brings me to point 3 on this, which is, you know, how do you react versus respond? Because I can completely see how, regardless of whether, you know, the dissenting opinion was brought up in this situation and ignored, whether nobody even bothered saying anything because what's the point? Nobody's going to listen anyway. Like, I'm not there. I don't know exactly how that went. But at some point, this landed on somebody's desk and caused a complete crisis mode. You know, where it's like, we're there. Now I'll get to my fourth point on how you actually, you know, they responded. But I think my point 3 is, in those moments, it can be tempting to just react to it, to just say, oh my gosh, the regulators showed up on our door. And I've worked in some highly regulated industries where I've seen this kind of stuff happen. You know, the regulators show up, there's a lawsuit filed, something happens, and people freak out. They freak out as they run around trying to figure out, what do we do to close this? And one of the first things you need to do, because the tendency is to just want to react, to quickly patch the hole on the wall, layer on new wallpaper, whatever it is, rather than stop long enough to say, hey, like, let's talk about what we actually need to do here. Let's talk about what is the right approach, because going back to it, we didn't get here by accident. Now, I will proactively address the fact that oftentimes that is one of the hardest steps to take, because it feels like this is moving a million miles a minute. We don't have time to think. We just need to come up with a response. And I'm not going to get into a lot of recent examples where this has happened and it doesn't go well, but just responding with the quickest solution you can come up with, or whatever is the emotional response that you think is going to get you through it with the least amount of consequence, is not the best way to go with it. And so, as you can see here, again, I don't know the details of whether they just reacted or if this was their conscious prompt. But in either case, for anyone, when you run into this, you have to fight against that desire to just have an emotional reaction to the fact that something went wrong. Whether you did know it was a possibility or whether it truly blindsided you and you had no clue that this might be something that happens, you have to fight against that urge to just do something and actually sit down and say, hey, like, let's talk about this. What got us here? Quickly. This doesn't mean you need to do a full-blown, autopsy on what happened and fix all those problems that got you here in the first place. But you do need to understand, okay, how did we get here? What are the real risks? What is the impact? What is the stuff that's going on? And how are we going to respond to this? How do we have a thoughtful, transparent response to what we're going to do? And that is not always easy, especially when things are flying around the room, but you need to do that. And I think as we come into 2026, now I think I will almost guarantee that same advisory meeting I was on last week, this was a topic of conversation. We talked about the fact that this is going to become more of the norm. Now, not this specific example. My gosh, I don't know that we can handle more of like these kinds of examples, but even some other ones, as the real liability of AI comes up, as some of the, rapid AI pilots and implementations that happened in 2025 start to come to fruition, and some of the risks that we thought weren't going to hit for, a while start actually coming due. More of all of us are going to start facing these situations where things did not go according to plan. There's some real consequences to not dealing with this, and you're going to be forced to have to say, what are we going to do? And my encouragement to everybody is to actually take a deep breath, get everybody to stop running around screaming, and say, let's not make the same mistakes that got us here in the first place. Let's actually pull folks together. Let's talk about why we got here. Let's make sure everybody in the room isn't just nodding their head in agreement on what we do, that someone somewhere is, when we say, what if we did this? Someone somewhere is going, okay, here are some of the risks we may need to consider. Should we choose that path? And if you still proceed with that path, you're going, okay, are we prepared? Should this go sideways? Type of a thing. Like going back to this one, their decision was, let's not turn off Flux. Let's just put it behind the paywall. If that was their response, if that was not just a reaction, I don't know that they took the previous steps very well. I don't know that somebody somewhere didn't go, perhaps we should consider the public response and the regulator response to us simply saying, we are not going to turn off this potentially illegal thing. We're just going to hand it over to people who are willing to give us money. We're going to monetize this. Like, if that didn't come up before this went out and nobody thought, hey, maybe we should really take that into consideration, that would indicate that this was a reaction to it. But if it's a response, you got a bigger problem on your hands. But my point is, you need to actually take the time to take that breath and go through these steps that you probably skipped that got you where you are right now. Now, the fourth and final point that I will bring up with this is tied to the fact that when these kinds of things happen, okay, in this case, this is a very serious moral, ethical situation. It may not always be that significant, but in any case, when you run into these things, it presents you with a choice. It really does. It presents you with a choice, not just to, hey, do we react or respond to this, but like with your response, what are we going to do here? Are we going to take the high road? Are we going to do what's right? Or are we going to try and like take the low road, which in this case, going back to my point, whether it was a reaction or a response, I'll be the first to say they took the low road. Instead of saying, yeah, this is terrible, we are not going to have this kind of image capability as part of our tool, we are not going to have this until we fix it, they said, I know, let's spin it. Let's actually convert all these unpaid users that are doing this and say, hey, we know you love it. Let's just charge you $20 a month. You want to keep that ability? Well, you need to pay us $20 a month. And then, when people balk at it, let's spin it and we'll say, well, at least now we have their credit card information. So, in theory, we could go after them and hold them accountable. Yeah, that's not the high road. That's the low road. And I understand why the low road at times can be tempting. In this case, I can't, but I can understand in times where it can be tempting. And even if you look at the whole Pentagon situation, it can seem like, they took the low road and then landed one of the biggest government contracts in the world, probably the biggest government contract in the world. That doesn't seem to be a consequence of their action. And so I can understand why there can be the temptation to say, hey, let's go for the short-term cash and we'll take the long-term brand toxicity hit. But I don't think people realize the debt, the moral and ethical debt you're taking on. It's like a bad loan shark deal. Hey, sweet. We capitalized on a bunch of subscriptions now to people so that they could pay to do this. We managed to land a defense contract. That's great. Well, that's coming at a very high interest rate, like a ridiculously high interest rate and some likely long-term legal risk. And, if not, complete shutdown in other countries, which is where you're going. And so, the high road, yes, there is some short-term loss. Had the Grok team actually sat down and said, we gotta turn this functionality off. It's clearly not ready for prime time. Okay, well, you did promise you were just going to unleash this. You're going to have to eat some crow. You may not be able to grab that sweet user subscription dollars from converting people over to paid. You may, not get the public attention because there is lots of folks who say any attention is good attention. So yeah, I guess in a way there's some short-term loss to it, but that comes with long-term trust. At this point, I don't know that Grok can do anything to change its public reputation. But, had they taken a moral high road on this, it certainly would have been a step in the right direction. And I think, unfortunately, profit is often a lagging indicator of trust. And so when you trade trust for short-term profit, they both eventually go down to zero. And that's something that often gets missed in this, because you look at a story like this and how I opened the episode, you might go, wow, so Grok did something potentially illegal, got called on the carpet for it. Its solution was, let's monetize this moral failure. And our reward for it is, maybe some public backlash, but a ginormous government contract. I understand that if you're looking at it through the lens of this week, it may seem like they're winning by taking the low road. I can assure you, this will not pay off in the long run. It's like gambling logic. It really is. If you look at any of the data related to gambling, you will see that whatever happens, even the short-term wins you may gain over time, going back to my point, when you're betting on trust for profit. It is gambling. You're saying, yeah, you know what, let's just roll the dice on trust and see what happens. You might get some wins. You might have a week like this week where, okay, we got some public backlash and we nailed it from a revenue standpoint. It doesn't last. And eventually those lines, not only do you erode the trust, but your profit goes down to 0 too. And once that happens, you're not coming back from that. And so for any of you who find yourself in a situation, hopefully not like this, I understand the temptation at times to take the low road. It can seem faster. It can seem like, yeah, it won't really blow back on me that hard, or we can cover it. We're big enough to kind of like make our way through it and hopefully just hope it passes. But it doesn't pay off in the long term. And my encouragement to everybody would be, take the high road consistently every time. Even if it means taking a hit in the short term, I promise you, in the long term, it will pay off. So, wrapping it up for today, I just kind of want to recap this whole thing and say, you know, first of all, one, as you come into 2026, now is the time to just audit where you are today. Do you have a foundation? Does everybody know what that foundation is? Are you actually doing things that are driving people to stay on that foundation, not get off of it? Listen to the dissenting opinions. Listen to that person who always brings up the thing you would just don't want to deal with. And no, you don't have to listen to it. You just have to be accountable if you choose to go a different path. Third, build in those circuit breakers. You know, when something hits the fan, don't just say charge forward, like slam on the gas with the parking brake on. Like, actually let the circuit breaker trip and take the time to go down and actually examine, why did that trip? Like, let's figure this out so that we don't just end up plugging the lamp back in the wall to only trip the breaker again. Like, let's actually do something to have a sustainable solution to it. And then 4, as you're making your decision about that sustainable solution, take the high road. Take the high road. Don't take the shortcut. Don't sell tickets to your mistake. I just feel like that is the cultural air right now. Let's just do a thing. And you know what? If it all blows up, hey, we'll just sell tickets to the show. And it's like, oh, come on. We're better than that. We're better than that. And, you know, as you look at other vendors, as you go into 2026, it's going to be important that you consider these things in your decision-making process. You know, regardless of your political feelings, the Pentagon is making an intentional choice on which AI vendor they're partnering with. And I think it's very interesting that this same week, Apple chooses one of its biggest competitors, Google. They go with Google AI, Gemini. They abandon their open AI stuff and go with Gemini. The same week, the Pentagon goes with Grok. And so what I can tell you is, as you go into these next coming months and years, as you figure out who you're partnering with, whether that's a tech vendor, whether that's a consulting partner, whether those other things, that's also another opportunity to say, hey, are we partnering with the right people? Are we partnering with people who also stand on our foundation, who support our foundation, whose products and services are built around reinforcing our foundation? Because if not, their crisis will become your crisis. And that's not something you want to deal with. And it's not something I want to see anyone go through. So once again, I'm Christopher Lind, and I hope you have a great week, and let's work together to stay future focused. I will see you on the other side.